Hi, I'm Dan, and today we're going to be going over the July 2025 release for BookStack, which includes a whole varied bundle of new features and improvements. The first of which is a new option within the markdown editor. So, as we've had for a long time, the markdown editor uses a specific code input, which gives us things like syntax highlighting to highlight little bits like links and headers, as well as line numbers. But this kind of smarter editor can have compatibility issues with certain browser functionality like extensions and browser level spell checking. So, as an alternative, in this release, you can now go to the options menu for the markdown editor and select a plaintext editor, which uses a very simple web plaintext input area, which will have much wider compatibility. And of course, you can toggle between these as much as you like. And while originally this was going to be just a simple display option, I have taken quite a lot of time in this release cycle to ensure many of the same features are here as with the normal markdown input area. When it comes to all the little things like dragging and dropping images, or for example using shortcuts to toggle different format types. All the same shortcut key bindings and editor buttons and actions and things like scroll syncing, they've all been made to work with this basic plaintext input as well. And now on to a change to description boxes. So description boxes like these for books, chapters and shelves, as well as common input boxes, have had their input updated to use the new WYSIWYG editor. So this may look very familiar because that's the intent to match the previous WYSIWYG editor that we had in these areas. But behind the scene, this is now using our new WYSIWYG editor that we introduced, which is now in beta status for Pages. But of course, this is a much cut down version, but this should provide us a good test bed for rolling out this new editor further to hopefully highlight some of the more fundamental issues that people may come across, so we can further reiterate and work on this before it becomes the default for page editing. And while we're on the subject of the new WYSIWYG editor, this has received a lot of improvements and fixes since the last feature release. One of the key areas being around media elements, for example like YouTube embeds, just all the little things like the resizing controls and the menu access, and for example this new toolbar is new just to provide easier access to the controls for media. But there's many other things such as a larger source code view with better formatted content, fixed text highlighting controls, more reliable table resizing, as well as many other things. So once again, a big thanks to everyone that's providing feedback via this thread for our beta phase of testing, and I still very much welcome feedback through this thread. So if you come across any issues, especially in those description and comment editors, then please let me know here so we can get this really refined. And now on to a change for setting a changelog. So the input for setting a changelog has been improved a bit. So it's no longer a single line input, so it's less cramped overall, as well as it's got a character counter, so that you now know when you're hitting the limit of what will actually be stored for the changelog summary. And a thanks to this user here for contributing this enhancement. And now onto the BookStack API, we have new endpoints for being able to export as a zip when it comes to books, chapters and pages, and these will return a zip export format in the same way that you'd be able to export as zip through the UI, which was a feature that we introduced in a late release last year. And of course, one of the main features of this zip export format was that they could be imported. So along with those, we also have a range of import API endpoints added in this release, and these cover the full scope of what you can do via the UI. So you can list out the pending imports, you can upload a zip ready for import, you can get the details of an import, you can run the import process for a zip that's been uploaded, and you can delete an existing pending import. And so the addition of these should allow better automation of those bigger batch processes that people may be doing to import content from other platforms, for example. And a thanks to this user on GitHub for kickstarting the development of this feature. Moving on, we have a new ability for tag classes. So this is a slightly more unknown customization feature that allows you to make customizations within BookStack based upon tags that apply to content. As an example, on this book we have a category tag with the value team planning, and the existence of this puts on the body tag in the HTML code a tag pair category team planning class. So this could be picked up by a customization to apply custom CSS or JavaScript code specifically to content that has this tag, such as when viewing this book. And while these could be useful, it was quite difficult to use them in a wider scope. So you could apply them to pages for specific page customizations. But if you wanted to apply a customization to every page in a book, you'd have to apply that tag to every page in a book. But as of this new July release, book and chapter tags will now exist on child content as tag classes, albeit prefixed with the name of that item type. So for example, if we go into this book page, and we can see this has no tags, but if we have a look at the code, this is a class of book tag pair category team planning because it's coming from the parent book. This means that we can apply a book-wide customization like we've got here. So in the custom HTML head content, I've got some custom styles that add a little important banner where there's a tag pair of categorization important. And this is also set to apply when there's a book tag pair of the same name. So if I add that as a tag to our book, hit save, we now see that on the book itself, but if we go into one of the pages, we also see that that customization is applied to one of the pages, even though this page has no tags. And we can also see this by going into the chapter here, there it is, and into the page there. So overall, this should provide a lot of extra opportunity for book and chapter wide customizations. And now some layout and design tweaks, and specifically to this 3-column layout that we have in a lot of cases in BookStack. I've spent some time just refining this a little bit. So sometimes you'd have the content in the sidebars cut off at the edges, especially on like tablet and half desktop screen widths. And I've tweaked things to make more efficient use of the space and to make that a less common occurrence. And I've also added some fades to the sidebar so that when content is overflowing beyond the bounds when you're scrolling, you now get this fade effect just to indicate that there's some content hidden there that's available to scroll to. And now for some server-side changes. I've made some improvements to how permission generation is done and how those are stored into the database, since certain actions will regenerate the view access permissions for content, and these actions being things like making permission changes or creating new content or moving a bit of content to a new parent item. And when this is done, this could sometimes clash when done in parallel with other permission changing operations. And the result of this, as kind of a safe failure scenario, would be that the permissions wouldn't generate, but this could lead to content going missing sometimes in these rare cases. But I've been through all of these actions that affect permission generation and wrap them up at a higher level now in transactions, which means that parallel processes that are making such changes will now correctly block each other, so they're kind of done one at a time instead of clashing in this error scenario, while also providing the ability to better roll back changes made when there's an error during an action in general. Now moving on to translations and languages, we have a new language option in this release, and that is Nepali, as demonstrated here, which of course I cannot read at all. But a big thanks to the users shown here who really quickly worked to get the language pretty much complete within BookStack. And of course a continued thanks to all the professional passage processors here that have provided translations since our last feature release. And now in terms of next steps, I will be continuing development on the new WYSIWYG editor, as has been the case for the last year or so, but specifically this is probably the phase where I'll start to think about the development capabilities in terms of how do we provide the required interfaces for people to make customizations that they might have been using with the existing WYSIWYG editor. And I'm not going to build it to be specifically exactly compatible with all the existing customization hacks out there, but I'll probably be looking to make sure that we cover a lot of the same kind of possibilities in most common customizations using the existing WYSIWYG editor. And then I may also continue some work that I started a few months back in terms of looking into a somewhat native LLM integration into BookStack. So here, this is a video where I'd come up with a proof of concept of building in a system that could index and store your BookStack content in the original BookStack database, but via LLM or AI-based transforms, which could be something you self-host or by calling out to an external LLM provider like OpenAI, which you could then query for search or via LLM question and answering, which is kind of what I display here. But when I started exploring this, I did come across a lot of issues and questionables and considerations that would have to go through. So I'll probably just start cracking through a lot of these, trying to fully understand this better, develop it out, and see if we can take this further towards something being potentially implemented. But that's everything that I've got to show for this update. Now, if you missed it earlier this month, I did also do a video and blog post about a decade of BookStack when we hit our kind of 10-year anniversary for the project. So I recommend viewing that if you're interested at all within the finances of the project, the figures, and I also did a bit of Q&A regarding the history and working on BookStack in that video. Otherwise, I hope you enjoy all the new features in this latest release, and I wish you a wonderful day.